Hi dear students, my name is Muhammad Ishaq Shinwari. I'll be your biology teacher. I would like you to open your books at page 1. When you open the book at page 1, you will see chapter number 1. And in chapter number 1, you will study all about the classification. Now, let me briefly explain the term classification for you. So, classification is the arrangement or sorting of living organisms into groups and subgroups. In this chapter, you will find out about the characteristics of living organism. Okay, how would you be able to differentiate between living and non-living organism? Naming organism using binomial nomenclature. How living organisms are classified and how to use dichotomous keys to identify living organism. Bold-faced letter red, they show that these are actually the key terms we are going to explain in this chapter. Okay, let's begin with the definition of classification, how classification can be defined. The branch of biology deal with the study of classification is called taxonomy. Okay, and classification can be defined as the arrangement or sorting of living organisms into groups and subgroups is called classification. So, in this chapter, you will learn that how living organisms, whether they are plants, animals, fungi, bacteria, or viruses, whatever type of living organism they belong to, you will learn how these are classified into groups and subgroups. Now, here is an example. This puzzling organism is, for the animal you can see in the picture, is the platypus. Okay, now you can see that it has a beak like bird. So most of you will think that it's a bird because it has a beak. Now, if you carefully look at the structure, it has hair upon the bodies. Again, this is the property of the mammal. So, at the same time, this living organism look like a bird and it also look like a mammal. Now, if you carefully look at the feet are webbed. It means that it can swim inside the water just like a frog. So a frog is an amphibian. So again it has the character of one more living organism, that is amphibian, because with the help of web feet it can swim inside the water. Okay, look at here, the puzzle of platypus. In 1977, British settlers arrived in Australia. They were amazed by many of the animals that they saw, and a strange animal with fur, webbed feet, and beak was among the most puzzling. Dear students, remember one thing: Australia is actually the country where you can see most of the strange animals, just like the one you are going to study in this chapter, in the first lesson, platypus. Now, why we study the platypus? We study the platypus because how living organisms are classified into groups and subgroups. This is actually the most important lesson. This relate your chapter to the real life experiences you are going to face. For example, you may or may not have see an animal. For example, they might have, you might be facing or seeing or watching an animal for the first time, and you can easily classify them if you have the right knowledge about the living organism. So the platypus is actually a type of animal that was not first noted by most of the scientists. It was the first time. Now it needs to be classified. Now, where is the puzzle, or where is the confusion? The confusion is This living animal live on the land. It is a terrestrial animal. It prey in the water and it swim with the help of webbed feet. It has a beak, okay, and the beak is attached to the body as if you have stitched the beak to the body of the platypus. So, just moving forward. In 1979, a dead specimen of this strange animal was taken to England, where it was studied by Dr. George Shaw. He gave the animal a later name Platypus anatomos. Platypus means flat-footed and anatus means like a duck. Okay, duck because you might have seen the feet of duck. They are webbed and they are specifically designed to swim inside the water. Someone pointed out the name Platypus has already been taken. Okay. A German scientist gave it the name Ornithorhynchus paradoxus. Ornithorhynchus paradoxus. The first word means nose like a bird and the second word means puzzling. This is the Latin name that is used for the animal today. Okay. Now, still, even it has the name Ornithorhynchus paradoxus, but most of the people recognize this strange animal by the platypus. Dear students, now we are going to explain the characteristics of living organism. Why we call someone a living organism and other things like chair or table non-living organism. Okay, living organisms have certain characteristics that separate them from non-living organisms. Remember always the word ringer, R-I-N-G-E-R, so that you could easily remember the characteristics of the living organism. Now, the first R means reproduction. All living organisms reproduce. I, irritability. Irritability means sensitivity. All living organisms are sensitive to changes inside their environment or around them. For example, they are sensitive to changes in the environment, whether internal or external. Nutrition, they need food to survive. Growth, they increase in number and also in size. Excretion, they remove the waste metabolic product from their bodies. And respiration, they need to produce energy. So, one and final is the movement or locomotion. Dear students, remember one thing, that plant shows only movement. There is no plant with locomotion. For example, they are stationary. They will remain at the particular place. Okay. Locomotion is actually the characteristic of animals. What is the difference between movement and locomotion? Movement is, for example, let's suppose you might be sitting right on the chair, but still you are moving. Locomotion means moving as a whole from one place to another. Okay, that is it. That is the difference between movement and locomotion. So plant shows movement and animal shows both movement as well as locomotion. Dear students, now we are going to explain each and every term in more detail. What is reproduction? The ability of a living organism to produce a living organism of their own kind. This property of living organism is said to be reproduction. For example, you might have seen that a plant can produce a plant of another type. An animal can produce an animal of the same type. So it means that an apple produces another apple. Okay, or for example, humans, mammals, frogs, etc., whatever that might be, okay, they actually produce their own kind. This capability of living organism is said to be reproduction. Next, we are going to study irritability. Irritability is another word for sensitivity. Most of the living organisms are sensitive to the changes in their environment. Okay, irritability means sensitivity. Living organisms are sensitive to the changes occurring in the internal or external environment, and this ability helps them better survive in an environment. What is meant by internal and external environment? For example, let's suppose you have a kidney pain. So you can recognize that you have problem inside the kidneys or lungs or abdomen or whatever the part or whatever that may be inside your body. You can recognize them. Also, you are sensitive to the changes in the external environment. For example, the light, the temperature, the coolness, the river, what day, night, okay, everything. You can detect all these changes in your environment. So this ability of the living organism is said to be irritability. Next, dear students, we are going to explain the nutrition. All living organisms need food to survive. Okay, this is said to be the nutrition. Organism takes substances like glucose, proteins, carbohydrates from their environment and use them to provide energy or material to make new cells. For example, carbohydrates are used to make energy. Proteins are used to make cells or damaged part of the body. Fats produce much more energy as compared to the carbohydrates and proteins. Growth is another characteristic of living organism. A living organism grow in size as well as in number. Growth means an increase in number or size of a living organism. For example, you might have seen the organism of day one are much smaller, delicate, or for example, they are incapable of moving. Okay, they need much more support. As the time passes, for example, 1 month, 2, 3, 1 year, 2, okay, with the passage of time, it increases, the cells inside their bodies increases in number, and so the living organism gain weight. That is said to be the growth. Okay, means an increase in the number or size of living organism is said to be the growth. All living organisms grow in size. They can multiply their numbers and they also increase in size. This ability of living organism is called growth. Excretion. During let me explain one more term over here is metabolism. Metabolism is the sum total of all the chemical reactions that are taking place inside the bodies of living organism. So during the process of metabolism, some of the waste metabolic products are produced, and the removal of these waste metabolic products are very important. So inside the bodies of living organism, whether plants or animal, there is a mechanism to remove these toxic waste products. So the removal of waste products that are produced as a result of metabolic reactions are called excretion. A removal of waste that are produced inside the body. For example, living organisms like humans, they remove undigested waste from the body. That cannot be called the excretion because undigested material are not produced inside the body. Instead, urine, which contains urea is produced inside the body. Okay. So the removal of urea in the form of urine from your body is said to be excretion, and the removal of feces from the body or the removal of undigested waste from the body in the form of feces is said to be defecation. One more time I would like to explain is respiration. Okay, respiration simply means the oxidation of food to release energy. All living organisms break down glucose and other substances inside their cells to release energy. They can use. Okay. Now, all living organisms, whether plants or animals, need energy. This energy comes from the food we eat. Plants produce the food particle they need, and animal actually absorb the food particles from the plants or other living organisms. One more time I would like to explain is movement and locomotion. All living organisms are able to move to some extent. Most animals can move their whole body from one place to another. And plant can slowly move part of themselves. So it means that if an organism is capable of moving the body as whole from one place to another, this capability of living organism is said to be locomotion. Animals show locomotion. They are more energetic and they are more motile. They usually move from one place to another. Plants only show movement. Okay, they do not show locomotion. Plant shows movement while animals show movement as well as locomotion. Locomotion is movement from one place to another. It's not plant, it's place. Common features of living organism. Okay. In addition to these 7 characteristics, living organisms have another features in common. Number 1. When we study living organisms under a microscope, we can see that they are all made of cells. These cells all have, number 1, cytoplasm, number 2, cell membrane, and number 3, a chemical called DNA. DNA is the short form of deoxyribonucleic acid, and this makes genetic material. Genetic material means DNA, RNA, chromosome, etc. All these things are collectively known as genetic material. And one more thing, ribosomes used to make protein inside the cells. Ribosomes are the tiny factories inside the cell and they produce proteins. And one more thing I would like to explain is the enzymes. Enzymes are the chemicals, they speed up a chemical reaction. They are used to carry out aerobic respiration. Enzymes do not have only single functions. For example, aerobic respiration, they are involved in almost all parts of the body. For example, enzymes are actually protein in nature, and your body produces over 10,000 of these proteins each second. Okay. So some of the enzymes, for example, they are required in the photosynthesis. Other enzymes are required in the digestion of food. Other enzymes are required in the excretion of food. It means that in each and every chemical reaction, the enzymes are required because enzyme speeds the chemical reaction up. Okay. Now, dear students, I would like you to open your books at page 3, classification. Classification means putting things together. There are many possible ways in which we could group living organisms. For example, we could put all the organisms with 2 legs into one group and all those without legs into another. Okay, now this is one way. Now look at the another way. Or we could put all the red organisms into one group and all the blue ones into another. Now, look at both of these statements. The first statement for the scientist is much more reliable as compared to the second one. Okay, 2 legs or 4 legs. Or, for example, red and blue is not very important. The first idea would be much more useful to the biologist than the second one. Reason why we need to classify living organisms. There are many reasons, but a few are over here. Number 1, the main reason for living organisms to classify is to make it easier to study them. For example, there are hundreds and thousands of species of plants and animals. Now, it's very difficult to study for an individual is okay. Now, until we classify them into groups and subgroups. This is the main reason why we need to classify them, to study them and to learn them, to know their characteristics and behavior. Number 1, we put horse, dog, mice into one group on the basis of hair on their bodies. So, 3 living organisms, horse, dog, mice, into one group on the basis of hair on their bodies. Okay, next, we think that all mammals share these features because they have all descended from the same ancestor that lived long. Now look at here, dear students, horse, dog and mice. They have the same ancestor. Ancestor means their parents. Their, for example, hundreds and thousands of years ago. Parents, they lived for hundreds and thousands of years ago. Now, evolution is actually the term we used for tiny changes among the living organisms. For example, as the time passes, the living organism they actually evolve from one form to another form. So it means that the ancestor of horse, dog and mice were the same. It means that these living organisms must be grouped into mammals because they share same features. Okay. One more thing I would like to explain, the ancestor they all share is called common ancestor, means their parents that live for years, for hundreds and thousands and millions of years ago. Now, using DNA to help with classification. Now, remember this one word, DNA. DNA is a short form of deoxyribonucleic acid. Okay. Now, let me explain the term DNA a little bit more. All living organisms, they are similar to one another, okay, or the DNA must resemble to one another, or they may be different from one another. Okay. For example, there might be two living organisms that look completely different from one another, but their DNA must resemble much more. So on the basis of the structure of DNA, we can classify living organism into groups and subgroups, and it is the most easier way to classify living organism into group and subgroups, and also this is the most scientific way. For example, why two living organisms are completely different from one another? Because they have completely different DNA. Why two living organisms resemble one another? Because their DNA resemble one another. So we can use this structure of DNA or the bases. For example, adenine, guanine, thymine and cytosine. These are actually the nitrogenous bases present inside the DNA. We can use the sequence of these nitrogenous bases to identify whether organisms belong to the same group or not. DNA is the chemicals from which our chromosomes are made. It is genetic material passed on from one generation to the next. DNA molecule contain 4 nitrogenous bases. We studied them: adenine, guanine, cytosine and thymine. Adenine always bond to the thymine and cytosine always bond to the guanine. The more similar the base sequence, the more closely related the species are to one another. For example, adenine usually linked with thymine and cytosine usually linked with guanine. Now, the scientists or biologists actually look at the base sequences, okay, how closely resemble these are. If they are closely related to one another, it means that these organisms must be placed in the same group. Now, classification system. The first person to try to classify organism in a scientific way was a Swedish naturalist Carl Linnaeus. Okay. He divided all different kinds of living organisms into groups called species. He recognized 12,000 different species. Species were grouped of organisms that share the same appearance and behavior. Now, we still use this system. Let me explain one more term over here. What is species? There is no concrete definition of the term species, but Individuals are said to be species if they can produce organism of their own kinds, and the organism produced can also produce organism of their own kinds. For example, is a mule cannot be called a species because it is produced from the combination of a horse and donkey, but the mule cannot produce organism of its own kind, so this cannot be called the species. Horses, donkeys, dogs, humans, plants, animals, all these are said to be the species because they can produce their own kinds, and the organism produced can also produce their own kinds. Species are grouped to larger groups called genera, singular genus. Each genus contains several species with similar characteristics. Several genera are grouped into families into orders, orders into classes, classes into phyla into kingdom. This is actually the sequence. Now, the smallest unit is the species and the largest unit is the kingdom. For example, animal kingdom. All the animals on the planet are grouped into animal kingdom. And for example, a human is a species in this kingdom. The binomial naming system. Dear students, look at here. Bi means two, nomial means naming system. This system actually gives each and every living organism two names, the species name and the genus name, the genus name and the species name. First the genus name written, then the species. Okay, look at here. Linus gave every species of living organism two names written in Latin. This is called binomial system. Binomial system means each living organism must contain the name of each living organism is actually the combination of its genus name and its species name. For example, the first name is the name of the genus the organism belongs to and always has a capital letter. The second name is the name of its species and always has a smaller letter. The two-word name is called binomial. Okay, means, for example, a Homo sapien. Homo sapien is actually the biological name of humans. Homo is the genus name and sapien is the species name. Okay, so Homo sapien is the binomial name of the humans or the scientific names of the human. For example, wolf belongs to genus Canis and the species Lupus, so its binomial name is Canis lupus.